And the panel is called Resistance. I don't know if people have noticed, but things in this country have gone from their typical very bad to wow. Bad even for us. Wow. It's really quite stunning. But I think of the really iconic phrase, for me it's become a mantra. I start every day, every morning. I don't even leave my house most of the time, but I still begin with this mantra. Help! That's not a mantra. That's more like, ouch. That's a cry for pain, but a kind of a rallying cry. Resist much, obey little. Walt Whitman. I think really that's a good thing to start every morning. Resist much, obey little. And poetry has a lot of wonderful tools in the toolkit to help us with that. There are many and they're varied, and we have some wonderful practitioners here to help us navigate this very stormy situation. And we'll begin with Roxi Power. Roxi Power, poet, performer, publisher, author of the wonderful book, The Songs That Objects Would Sing from 2023. Founded the Transgenre Anthology series, Viz Interarts at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where she is a teacher. Podcasts and organizes readings for the Hive Poetry Collective in Santa Cruz. She performs live film narration, Neo-Vinci nationally, etc., etc. A force for nature, taking her MFA in poetry from Cornell University and helping us resist much and obey little. Roxi Power.
I'll be talking about social poetics, documentary poetry, and interventionist art and poetry. And we've already learned that I'm a podcaster, an anthologist, a teacher, and an inter-arts performer. So I'll just say really quickly that I brought my two inter-arts anthologies, Viz Inter-Arts, that I edit at UC Santa Cruz, and they'll be back there. And this is just while I'm talking about social poetics and documentary poetry, that'll be up. So all these practices that I just mentioned involve and invite conversations between people, forms, and aesthetics that are not always aligned with one another, especially insofar as professional career silos go, the ones that organize themselves around performance versus poetry versus art. And in my anthologies, I try to put people in conversation with each other and try to transcend the careerism that goes with, I have been published in this wonderful journal that, promotes my career, and to get people out practicing social practice in the arts to make actual change on the streets. So the person that I can think of that does that best is Mark Nowak, who wrote a book called Social Poetics, right? Poet critic Mark Nowak, whom I recruited to submit to Winter in America again, wrote a book called Social Poetics, as I've just said 3 times. He talks a lot about the tools of poetry production, like workshops, to reach different audiences, people in prison and trade unions and so forth. His primary influence is Langston Hughes, who wrote an essay and that was published by W.E.B. Du Bois magazine Phylon. My adventures as a social poet, he says. I've never known the police of any country to show an interest in lyric poetry as such. But when poems start talking about the moon and begin to mention poverty, trade unions, color lines, and colonies, somebody tells the police. Nowak tries to embed his work as a poet and workshop leader in spaces of work, trade unions, and detention jail, creating new conjunctions between writers and workers in formations, such as the Union of Radical Workers and Writers and the Worker Writers Schools. He writes, in an era when many communities of poetry continue to embed themselves deeper and deeper into elite institutions, private colleges and universities and so forth, costly writers' retreats. This one is not. Poetics for and by the working class people who read it, analyze it, and produce it within their struggles to transform 21st century capitalism into a more equitable system of relations is necessary. So he, in his workshop, historicizes workshop, which contains 2 related though disparate trajectories of the noun, a room or small building where goods are manufactured or repaired, right? And the transitive verb, what we do with our creative writing. One has come to displace the other, but in the 1556, the first print use of this term in the OED cites Cicero. Neither can the workshop truly have in it any gentlemanly doing. Since the dawn of the MFA industrial complex, a system that pairs astronomically expensive creative writing workshops for students and the attendant massive increase in debt with a grossly underpaid adjunct labor, all to the benefit of the corporatization of universities, the term workshop is more associated now with elite rather than working class cultures. In our present neoliberal era, starting with Reagan and Thatcher, who famously dismantled trade unions, it's hard to get outside the forces that consign our creative practices to economic practices. Next, Breathe, Roxi, is documentary poetry. So some of this is thanks to Sally Connolly and her 2020 talk at Lit Balm Poetry, a Zoom reading series about the future of poetry. Sally just passed away 2 weeks ago and was very beloved. She writes, documentary poetics has no founder, no signature spokespeople, not so much movement as a modality within poetry ranging from first-person auto-ethnographic to a more objective third-person documentary practice and in between. Poetry that represents current and past events. So good examples are Mark Nowak's Coal Mountain Elementary, Muriel Rukeyser's, I'm sure all of you know this book, The Book of the Dead, both obviously about coal, and our own Paul Nelson's A Time Before Slaughter. That book is back there. Documentary poetry reanimates the past, drawing on documentary filmmaking techniques such as Pound's prose cinema, juxtaposing ideas and images through multiple perspectives, much like film, though it inclines toward the left. Pound's Contos is a proto-documentary poem with right-wing politics. So, how many of you, I'll just kind of scooch, here's the other biz, interventions, which is what I'm getting ready to talk about in a second. But what happened? Here it is. M. Norbesse Phillips wrote Zong, right, which is a documentary poem, a book, or a poetic redaction of a legal case that involved the owners of the slave ship Zong trying to claim insurance for the 150 slaves that they themselves had drowned. They believed if they died of natural causes rather than being thrown into the sea, they would have had to bear the cost. In her afterward, Philip writes, "It came upon me that the fugue, both meanings of the word, was a frame through which I could come to understand Zong written as a series of different fragmented voices." So I could say a lot about fugues and different voices in the documentary poem, but I won't. So Yeats famously claimed, "Poetry makes nothing happen." Harumph. Auden expanded on this in memory of W.B. Yeats, right? Art is a product of history, not a cause. It does not enter history as an effective agent. Art is not life and cannot be a midwife to society. Obviously, I'm up here, I completely disagree, so does Sally Connolly. I don't have time to go into why, but I think it's a way of abdicating responsibility and hiding behind aesthetics. Perhaps in the Q&A we can talk about that. Now I'm going to move on to interventionist art and poetry. And I've told you about the book that I edit. And so here is a 3-second version of my workshop yesterday. So we can read, it's a recombinant book. There's visual art and text. This is Felicia Rice, Guillermo Gomez Peña, the performer, and Enrique Achagoya's designs in My Land Cut in Half. And here is Tired of Walking North by the same people. So what I'd like to just show you really quickly are some people who are considered interventionist artists. Interventionist art was a term that was created by Nato Thompson in his Mass Mocha exhibit, where you intervene into the public sphere itself and make change. And so what Linda Montano, a very famous endurance artist, did, in many instances in this case, she tied herself to somebody and lived in that state for a year. And then she started doing 7-year art practices according to the colors of the chakra, wearing red all year, being in a red room, a small cube, for 2.5 hours a day, listening to one note, say B flat, speaking in one accent, say French or Hillary Clinton. And then she would move to the next color on a scale she liked this so much. She wanted to be a Catholic nun, to endure, that she did this 3 times, so 21 years. People that I teach with and that are in this version of the book, and we did this conference called Intervene, Interrupt, Art as Social Practice. Beth Stevens, an art teacher, her wife, Annie Sprinkle, the famous porn star, started getting married, same-sex weddings every year, the red wedding, the yellow wedding, on up. And then by the time they got to the green wedding at UCSC for the conference, they decided to found a movement called ecosexuality, and they married the earth. Then they started marrying the sky, blue, purple, cold, all of this. You can find out more. Reverend Billy is obviously a very famous person. He's a preacher who intervenes into public spaces like Disney stores and Times Square and starts preaching to people to stop shopping to avoid the shopocalypse that is with his Stop Stopping Fire. Guillermo Gomez Pena crucified himself in a crucifixion project in the Marin Headlands to protest California immigration policies under Gray Davis with his partner Roberto Cifuentes. They are a really good argument against the Society of the Spectacle, which of course the Situationists wrote, because so many people just watched them as their shoulders were dislocating and their lungs were collapsing, and nobody helped them down until it was almost too late. So, Situationists are the people that give us this kind of lexicon about this spectacle. Guy Debord wrote that book, The Society of the Spectacle, and why it's important. I'm on it, okay, it's good.
Watch just said move, that's all it said.
Okay, so neo-Vinci is a form of, okay, let me go back. Paul may be nervous looking at his watch. Okay, so the Situationists were 1968 practitioners who helped in tandem with workers shut down Paris in a general strike. There were many strikes around the globe in 1968, as you probably all know. And this is a general strike that was particularly helpful, successful. They went around and tried using the form of détournement, a French word that means to turn meanings, right? To turn an object towards some other meaning. So they were, because this generation was reading the funnies, the comics, they would often fill in the comic speech bubbles with new words. Everything is fine, nobody's happy. So neo-Vinci is a form of détournement that I helped to co-found in 2003 with San Francisco experimental poets. And we would détourn films that people were interested in, that people know. This is for Zach, because I've been making him watch Metropolis, which is what I détourned, along with many others, but I'm just going to show you a clip. So the Vinci was the film teller in Japan and Korea during the silent film era, who would stand to the side of the screen, combining theater and film as the Japanese like to do. The producers in America didn't want to do that because they wanted total control over the films. There were 10,000 of them, tens of thousands, more famous than actors and directors. And so we started just turning down the volumes of films and, repurposing them. So I don't know if you have ever seen Fritz Lang's, no. I guess I'll have to scooch up there. But how many of you have seen? I had it all queued up, which is upsetting. Yeah. Hold on, you guys. How many of you have heard of Fritz Lang's 1926 first robot movie? I guess if I just start playing it, I can get up there. So this is just a lecture I did for my art and activism course. And what maybe you need to know, Metropolis, let's just stop, is that Hugo Ball is the main character, and he is the son of Drumpf. Remember Drumpf? His father, Drumpf, owns Metropolis, the Drumpf Tower, and Hugo Ball wanders into the workers' city, which keeps the city alive by extracting the essences of the workers and then blowing them into the workers, into the metropolis, to freshen the moods and the minds of the rich above. Figures of the impossible, both dead and alive. Workers shuffled like zombies to their posts. One night shift, on his way to a hip underground club in the otherwise grim workers' city, Hugo took a wrong turn and bore witness to a night shift dance that made his father's city shimmy. Workers at their clocks kept the city literally energized, so they thought, but didn't yet suspect they also kept it spiritually energized. As the machines overheated, they leaked the workers' extracted spirits. As if from a giant bong hit, and almost as if he was channeling somebody, Hugo had a vision like no other about ravenous capitalism. He thought The clock dance was a bit hard on the bones, but could they be extracting something even more precious than marrow? Moloch, whose mind is pure machinery. Moloch, whose factories dream and croak in the fog. Moloch, whose soul is electricity and banks. Moloch, whose fate is a cloud of sexless hydrogen. What the hell was that? Hugo wondered. Oh, Dada, my head is splitting from this awful vision by your clocks. And Moloch was there, and Exodus was there, and you were there in a way. What were you doing in the machine halls, freighter? I told you, I go by Hugo now. Frivolous nom de pen. You go by Hugo? Not. I'm not a Huguenot. I'm German Catholic like you. Anyway, your magnificent city, Father, and you, the brain of this city, and all of us in the city's light. Speak in complete sentences, freighter. I'm not afraid of anything, Dada, other than Moloch, whose buildings are judgment. As he spoke, his comprehension and his words began to scramble, as well as his visions, and it seemed to be contagious. What's up? It's like the Tower of Babel in here. And just look at your tower. It looks evil and definitely penile. It is evolved and somewhat penal, considering the security. Penile! Oh, never mind. And anyway, where are the people, Father, whose hands built your city? Certainly not enjoying a balcony view from Drumpf Tower. They're like in a cave. Where they belong. Prepare the bomb? Where they belong. That's no industrial dance party, it's hell. And you think that that's where they belong? These guys are really alienated, going down fast, or slow, or whatever. You want to keep them in the depths, so you don't have to be around their depression? Yep. His father hated depressed people. And everyone was bummed out about the Anthropocene in a big way. Dada, I love you, but you're tearing me apart. This boy, so sensitive. As if in a dream, Hugo found himself back among the workers who were leaking all over the place. Man, this is potent stuff. Uh-oh, I feel like I'm about to channel again. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered time does flow, and mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. Was Blake right? Can you be a visionary poet and a labor activist, even in hell? Brother, do you know what these spirit machines are doing to your spirit? Do you guys not have a shop steward down here? We don't even have a union. The machine! Someone has to stay at the machine, or I'll lose my job. You might sing the body electric poet boy, but I gotta dance it, or the city'll go dark. Someone will stay at the machine. I have linguistic plenitude, enough for all. The hell's linguistic plenitude? Someone will stay at the machine. Me. Don't call me meat. I said me. Now, how does work? So that's Neo Finch, and I'm told that can be included someday in Cascadia Poetry. Now, in the festival, I'm trying to get out of here so that I can get to playing a 2-minute clip of Brenda Hillman, but I don't seem to be able to move myself. There I am. Go. All right, so this is a small interview, long interview in a few minutes before later. I just wanted to end with this 2-minute clip where Brenda and I talked in the fall of 2023 about her amazing book. And you can go to High Poetry Collective, highpoetry.org, to hear the whole interview. And here she's talking about small Brenda and large Brenda in a form that she writes in. And what I just like you to be thinking about the stigmathia, which she'll tell you about, is multiple eyes, right? Because in the avant-garde poetry world, we are often admonished rather dogmatically to abolish the I. And I feel like we could complicate it rather. If you have multiple eyes, or like Rimbaud said, I is an other, you can possibly have your eye and eat it too, or talk with Brenda about how that works. Here we go. Oh no, it's David Bowie. We don't love David Bowie.
It's a poem about anxiety, and about
Conception, the usual lyrical soul, a singular I. But the singular I still is prey to the material world, the fires. There are electrons of joy, Talking and about there are the fires Hegelian that are
Oh,
spiritual
that
and
she
that's
talks about.
spoken, and there are real fires. Conditions It's starting in a that second. should cause stress. Activism in Poetry, Some Brief Reports is the second section, and there's 12 poems and 2 interruptions. And I'm wondering if we could just start with the interruption and explain what the interruption is, which is on page 30. In brackets, you write throughout the book, interruption, stigmathia.
Yeah, so, sure. So a stigmathia form, in a dialogue, in a play, and it is from the Greek, as Roxy said, and it's just a piece of dialogue going, a rapid fire exchange of a comment in a dialogue very fast, and I have a lot of those in my head, and I'm sure a lot of you do too, where you're talking to yourself and you're just answering it back, and so the voices in my head are always very chattering back and forth, and so they are always kind of main Brenda. I think of main Brenda as always in control, so they won't get too wild. But the stigmathia on page 30 follows notes outside West County Detention Center. Bob and I were participating in a monthly vigil at the West County Detention Center, and I was answering an internal voice that was having a lot of trouble, having called out the county sheriff in the previous poem. And that voice said to me, well, there's no such thing as political poetry. And the voice answered back, yes, there certainly is. And then the first voice put it this way, there's no such thing as non-political poetry. Yes, there is actually. Well, what if the sheriff sees that poem she just put in there? He's totally not going to see that poem.
That's great. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll just say, if we can't be Socratic with MAGA yet, maybe start with ourselves. And Brenda's conversation is about the existence of political poetry, whether there's such a thing as a non-political poem. When people who have declined to submit to Winter in America, people are saying this to me because I'm not a political poet, they say. I can refer them to Brenda. Thank you for listening, everybody.
Thank you so much, Roxy. Our next speaker is Katie Sarah Zale. She's published 4 collections of poetry, including, and this title always reminds me of what I speculate to be the weight of the current leader of the so-called free world, and her book is called The Weight of a Leaf. Finalist for the Arizona Book Award, and you'll see also tomorrow she is one of the several wonderful chefs behind Winter in America again. And she is hard at work for a book that many of us are very anxious to see come into the world, and that is her biography of Sam Hamill. Katie Sarah Zale.
Planning for this panel, I thought, I talked to some of the other individuals here, and they said, oh, Katie Sarah, you've got it, you've been saying this stuff over and over. But what I find is when I've come to a new place and I've listened to all of you, I said, what I was going to say before isn't what I want to say now. So I've experienced that. So I was up too late last night, but because it was important to me to really share not only what I think, but what I've learned, by listening to so many of you. Because my head is groggy from this honoring of you, I hope you don't mind if I do a little looking at my screen here. And the first thing that came to me was, I don't want to resist anymore. I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't be on this panel here. I don't want to protest. It's not what I want. But who am I kidding? Truth is, I'm angry. I want to punch a wall. I want to unsubscribe from the New York Times. I want all these these Substacks that come at me when I wake up in the morning. I don't want to do that anymore. I'm thinking of moving to Canada.
Canadian applause.
I talked to Sharon.
She's a real estate agent.
So my thought is, I'll be at peace there, right? She's shaking her head. I have big plans here. I don't think so either. The truth is, what I really want to do is write poetry. My head, mostly my head, knows that poetry is a Zen practice. And that's the real answer. You know, as Gary Snyder has said, who got it from the ancients probably, it's about practice. It's not about a physical place, it's about the kokoro, the heart. The heart and mind, which Zen believe is one and the same. So it's about finding a way to take all that I know and all that I've learned and balance it with compassion and acceptance. No hard task, right? I need to learn how to take it all inside and find peace with it. Yes, impossible. But as Sam Hamill said, it's the only path. It's the only thing. And as someone else said today, you know, dear Robert Michael, and I think he got it from Li Po or one of the other ancients, you know, there's no getting there. So even though it's a constant practice, Sam Hamill called himself, he says, I am a practicing Buddhist, I am a practicing poet. No matter how many books they put out, we're all still practicing, trying to get there, and it's the only thing we can really do. Kenneth Rexroth, Alan Watts, Gary Snyder, Phil Whalen, and the Chinese ancients taught Sam. Basho taught him that there is only one path, and that's the path to the interior, to self-understanding. Rexroth told Sam to read everything you can and to learn about the world of poetry. Read it all. And Sam and Basho and all the people in their heads and things they have read are guiding me. An Old Man on the Riverbank by George Seferis was one of Sam's top favorite poems. And the poem explores the search for meaning amidst suffering and uncertainty. And it reflects the author's concern during World War II and highlights the human need for guidance and hope, not the need for resistance, but for guidance and hope. Here's a few things from Lucci's 10 Points of the Art of Writing, written around 300 AD. There's nothing new, people. You know, it's gone back to Confucius in 500 BC, and, you know, Lucci just took those old wise words and put them into this. But it's amazing. It's the same thing we're teaching our students and the same thing we're doing about poetry. And so, one, draw sustenance from masterpieces of the past. Look to the past, learn the past, learn about poetry and its beginnings. And something hard for me, but learn to recite them. Learn to recite them. Second, see the interconnectedness of all things. You know, an old message we've heard many times since we've been here. Listen quietly to find your own inner voice. Confucius, find the proper names for things. That's what we do as poets, right? And know that emotion and reason are really the same things. And the work, your work, must move the heart. We have discussions about this a lot as editors of the book, and I say, if I didn't feel it someplace, it's failing. The poem is not exactly what it should be yet. It's got to move the heart. And even though there's more, I'm going to emphasize one as particular is deny the ego. You know, and I think of all the work a lot of us have done, you know, the great work in the name of resistance and peace in the world. Really what it comes down to for me today is just saying, you know, I'm happy to be in this room and learning from all of you, and we're doing the work right here. Everything I write, I have to say, you know, I always see these people come up that have great humor in their poetry, and I go, you're not going to get any of that from me. You know, everything I write is related to social injustice, personal and cultural wounds. You know, as we know, Sam Hamill was very wounded, a wounded person. But his poetry, my gosh, it moves the heart. It definitely moves the heart. It's a person who is struggling between his wounds and trying to be the best he could be as a Buddhist practitioner. I struggle to understand my own and humanity's relationship with the world, to relate to, here's a quote again, to species that are more than our human friends. Do you know where I quoted that from? I got a crush on Robert Michael there. His mind, he's not paying attention. That happens to me all the time.
Both ways.
He's waving. Okay. And I'm just going to. Oh dear. All right. I'm just going to close with. I understand that resisting or fighting the world will not change it. My purpose is to use my poetry to change myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Our penultimate speaker, next speaker, Brenda Cárdenas. You know, she's edited a volume, an anthology that has, I think, the secret, co-edited, the secret kernel behind, the secret sauce for this panel. Resist much, obey little, inaugural poems of the resistance. So I think she comes to us superbly qualified. Current Wisconsin Poet Laureate, has authored a book called Trace, winner of the 2023 Society of Midland Authors Award for Poetry. She's written a book called Boomerang, and 3 chapbooks, co-edited other edited volumes, including Between the Heart and the Land, Latina Poets in the Midwest, and so many other things. Brenda, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here among you. I am learning so much this weekend that my head's exploding, which is just wonderful. So the panel, you're going to speak on a panel on resistance. Ooh, that's big. That's large. And I started to think about, you know, my own activism on and off over many, many years. My mother would say that the part of me that's an activist started before I could even talk, because I was baptized by a man named Father Grappi. And if you know anything about Milwaukee, Father Grappi was one of the main leaders there in the civil rights movement and in fair housing, and in he led marches of African American people across the viaduct in order to integrate. And he baptized me, and then he left the priesthood. and drove a bus, right? and started all this civil rights work, right? Or he was already doing it, but you know, he really upped his game right at that point. So my mother says, you rabble rouser, it starts way back before you were ever even talking. And I think of other, like refusing to say the Pledge of Allegiance in high school and just getting these 72 cards day after day after day because I'm not going to pledge my allegiance to this country who killed all those people in Vietnam. You know, right? Anyway, lots of activism during the civil wars in Central America, trying to push back against the United States intervention there in the 1980s. But to come to more present time, in 2011, I participated in the Wisconsin uprising against the then Governor Scott Walker's public employee union busting bill, during which at its height had more than 150,000 protesters in the state capitol and on the streets of Madison, Wisconsin. In fact, by the seventh day, protesters had undertaken a physical occupation of the state capitol building, establishing a fully functioning community within its public spaces, including an information center, a sleeping area, a medic station staffed by members of the Madison Community Wellness Collective, and food stations. And with food for protesters that was supplied by local businesses. There were even doctors writing excuses for teachers so that they didn't have to go to work during this movement. And I mean, in the midst of all of it, I'm running back and forth between Milwaukee and Madison and going there to engage in the protests myself, but simultaneously taking these forms to my doctoral students going, they're not going to let you dissertate unless you sign this because they're sleeping on the Capitol floor, right? And I just couldn't write poetry at that moment, right? Even though it was all happening around me, I couldn't come to it through poetry. And so I wrote an essay called Bread of the Earth, One Worker's Perspective on the Wisconsin Struggle for Justice. It just felt like that was the form for that moment. And it was originally published on a blog called Dispatches from Poets on the Ground, and that circulated widely on the web. And this speaks to what I'm going to speak to in a moment. I'm just going to read a little excerpt from that, short excerpt from that essay. On day 3 of the Capitol occupation, the Assembly Republicans shut down hearings on Walker's budget repair bill so that they can move it rapid fire to a vote. My husband and I are among 30,000 protesters who are flooding the elevators, hallways, and stairwells in an attempt to block the senators' routes to their chamber and outshout any possible vote. The noise is deafening. Suddenly, thousands of shhs fly across the rotunda, and for a long moment, the chants fall silent as the news spreads. The 14 Democrats have fled the state to prohibit the vote. Then the wave of cheers louder than any I've ever heard. There is so much unison that I forget my own voices among the others cheering. You couldn't anticipate or script this. I cannot capture it, nor do I wish to, but the moment was a seed syllable of some new collective utterance that may find its way into poetry. So, not long after that, I was asked to contribute written answers to interview questions for the Poetry of Society of America series, Red, White, and Blue, regarding what they called political poetry and what we're calling the poetry of resistance. And I responded to most of the questions with essay-length answers. One point I sought to make is that one of the most important promises of poetry for me, and this is maybe the 5th time we're hearing this, is the interconnection that it finds and that it fosters, which I see as political as well as cultural and spiritual. And I wrote in those essays this: Consider what linked arms have meant to political protest in many places and eras throughout history, or what in 2011 Tucson high school students' act of chaining themselves to school board members' chairs in an attempt to save their Mexican American Studies program meant to anyone involved in the struggle for ethnic studies. Consider the connection established de una voz a otra through the human microphone in the Occupy movement, or the decision of Wisconsin firefighters and police officers exempt from Walker's union busting bill to join non-exempt union members in the Wisconsin uprising. Consider the very terms labor union and union busting, and then consider how overtly political the right wing's ability to merge the identities of corporation and person in a Dali-esque nightmare that seals plutocracy's deal so that it can more easily divide the poor, working, and middle classes from one another, so that it can more easily divide the poor, working, and middle classes from themselves, from their own social and economic interests. Connectedness and lack thereof are political. So those were some of the ways in which it's entered my writing. And I don't want to go on too long, so I'm going to. I talk a little bit in here. I wrote these comments out about poetry that's political doesn't have to be dogmatic. It's not necessarily polemical. It doesn't start with the answer before it fully considers the questions. It doesn't simply tell me what I already know so that I can pat myself on the back for getting it, right? Some of the poetry that I appreciate most and that folks would characterize as political investigates, it deconstructs, it reformulates, quotes, splices, collages, and through a gathering of voices and materials may even expose and inform, while always simultaneously asking new questions without readily supplying their answers. So it doesn't have to be in your face, right? Although sometimes maybe it does, especially these days. I now, as we sit here now, think about where we're at. I mean, you're speaking to your anger, right? And we're at a place where just believing in and respecting the interconnection of all beings has become an act of resistance, right? The practice of empathy has become an act of resistance. I've really appreciated in my life the collaborative and communal poetry projects of resistance that I've been a part of, maybe most. One was co-editing with 19 other editors, Resist Much, Obey Little, inaugural poems to the resistance. Brenda has a poem in there. That was the brainchild of Kent Johnson. He was one of those that it was the brainchild of, and Michael Bogan. And it was an anthology of 740 pages, 350 poets from various countries. Spuyten Duyvil published it in 2017. And the whole group of us, the project was conceived of, we solicited, selected, assembled, edited, and designed the book in little more than 2 months, because we wanted to get it to press and out in the world shortly after, 2 weeks after Trump's first inauguration. In their introduction to the anthology, Michael Bogan and Ken Johnson wrote, "This emergency mode was triggered, of course, by a brute and very non-alternative fact that a racist, misogynist, bully, and charlatan has succeeded in snake oiling his way to supreme power by manipulating the fears of a substantial minority of the American electorate. As we write this, barely 2 weeks after the inauguration, his bizarre cabinet nominees seem cast for something like a new reality TV doomsday series." That was 2017. And look at where we are, you know, I mean, So, anyway, you know, my role as a contributing editor was, you know, inviting people to submit work so that we could make this as diverse as possible. And I was able to get the work of Swar Masanat, a poet from Jordan. If you don't know her work, please look at it. Franklin K.R. Klein, a Cherokee poet, Gabriel Gooding, Doug Kearney, Sheriff Carraza, a poet from Mexico, Chinyi Chen. A lot of these poets you probably know, Craig Santos Perez, Juan Morales, and they're just wonderful, wonderful poets. One of my favorite poems in that book, it's very short if you don't mind me reading it to you, is called The Villagers, and it's Paul Martinez Pompa. And he writes, "They took to the streets by the thousands, not knowing what they were, only that they had been fooled by the sudden trees overhead, by the faces backing up from the sewers and blooming from their bathroom floors, by the beautiful shovels rushing in to conceal entire families. One by one they looked back, each afraid to hear his own name. And in this there comes a moment for seeing, when the rifles begin to speak and we learn what it means. We learn what it means and who doesn't. When the capitalism's delicate finger refashions an old longing, sending a hush across the land. Once upon a time there was a brick, but there weren't enough hands willing to throw it." Another tiny poem from there that I absolutely adore by Norma Cole is called Hard Candy. The man can't read. In terms of my own personal work as a poet, I wrote a poem called Because We Come From Everything. It's a collage poem that's titled and using a line from Juan Felipe Herrera's poem Border Bus. And with the exception of a few conjunctions and prepositions such as and from, which I added, all of the language in the poem was borrowed from works by Mexican American and Native American authors whose books were removed from the Tucson public school classrooms when the Tucson United School District banned the Mexican American Studies program in the 2010 law HB 2281. It's been overturned, but they did that. They took all the books out. And this was my this to them, right? I took snippets of their language from their literary works, remixed them, collaged them together. Luckily, in 2017, a federal judge declared the law unconstitutional and enacted with discriminatory intent. That wouldn't happen today. I doubted that it would be overturned today. And then the last little project I'd like to talk about was a collaborative book-length poem that I was so lucky to be invited to participate in called American Gun. It was written by 100 Chicagoans, although I'm in Wisconsin and from Wisconsin. I lived in Chicago for almost 10 years, and whenever they're doing a Chicago project, they always invite me back, and I'm always like, I've been gone like almost 20 years now. They're like, that's okay, right? So it was written by 100 Chicagoans in 2020. It's a collective response to the individual suffering behind the statistics. Big Shoulders Books editor Chris Green asked 100 poets from across the city to take turns writing a communal poem about Chicago's gun violence. The poets range in age, gender, race, ethnicity, and poetic experience. There are well-known poets, Ed Robeson, Haki Madhubuti, Ed Hirsch, as well as young poets from young Chicago authors, and young poets from Chicago's alternative high schools, where statistically students experience the most gun violence in the city. The poem's a pantoum, a poetic form, as many of you know, where every line is repeated twice. Our editor, Chris Green, chose that form because its structure of repeating lines mirrors the semi-automatic firing of a weapon and also the seemingly endless cycle of shootings in Chicago. However, the main title of the poem is American Gun, not Chicago Gun, and points to the gun epidemic as not simply a Chicago problem, but an American one, despite the rhetoric that we hear today as troops descend upon Chicago. Most Americans want more sensible gun laws, and Chicago has been doing a lot to try to clean up the crime there. Chris Green gave us each a day to to construct a 4-line stanza that incorporated the rules of the pantoum, where lines 2 and 4 of the previous stanza became lines 1 and 3 of the new stanza. We each then wrote 2 lines based on the sense and sound of the 2 lines we inherited from the previous poet. So the recurring lines twine in and out of one another, and the result becomes a call and response written both by individuals and by community. And so that whole project for me was, to me, the best of this notion of interconnection. And I'll stop there. I'm going on way too long.
Thank you so much, Brenda. I think one good Brenda deserves another. So our next speaker is Brenda Hillman. She doesn't really need an introduction, but she got one last night. So I would first say all that you heard from Paul last night. I would just add to it. There's so many reasons why Brenda Hillman's such a beloved figure. A, she's just a very lovely human being. But 2, her work is really quite impressive. I'll just point out 3 features that I myself esteem about it. 1, she's one of the great innovators of form. When I think of form in Brenda Hillman, I think of form like in life form, breathing, evolving, surprising, the counterforce to sclerosis and petrification. She's also a very complicated thinker, pulls us away from our cheap platitudes and one-liners and silver bullets, which makes her a very profound poet, but not like what I do, philosophy, but somehow disguised as poetry, but really showing us how a poet thinks as a poet. Brenda Hillman.
So we often forget to thank, honey, don't trip. We often forget to thank, so Veronica, and all of the people whose names I didn't catch, but wonderful person at the camera, and Zach, and Chris, who just helped me, a strong and silent figure who's there. So thank you, Chris, for being there, and for listening to all of our poetry and everything. I only have like 6 slides, so I'm not going to look at that very much. But here, let's see. Maybe I'll stand here. I'm going to put the frog up because we heard a lot yesterday about invasive species. So he is an invasive species in my area. But before we start, because Bob got us started and Lauren got us started thinking about body, and so let's all put our hands on our bellies. Because these are our nearest neighbors. I had my priest in Inverness bless my microbiome on St. Francis Day, because I don't have a pet. You're supposed to bring your pets to get them blessed. And I said, could you bless my microbiome? So here's your neighbor, your closest neighbors every day. You should say hello to them. There they are. There are millions and millions of them. They're really like, so say hello to your neighbors every day. Resisting with grief and love. I have 3 topics. Resisting with grief and love, resisting without rhetoric, and resisting with or without despair. Let's start with the eco-elegy. And I'm so impressed and in love with my fellow panelists. So thank you for your beautiful words, and for the panel this morning. It was incredible. So I wrote mine out because of AWP. We always stick to 7 minutes. So I wrote mine out so I could time it. Let's start with the eco-elegy, Mourning for Earth. Elegies are rooted underground in experiments with song. The song can be impure, degraded emotion. Judith Butler writes on grief and rage. Perhaps grief is imagined to end in violence, as if grief itself could be killed. Can we perhaps find one of the sources of nonviolence in the capacity to grieve, to stay with the unbearable loss without converting it into destruction? Butler proposes a process that will avoid violence. We grieve what is perceived to be unbearable. I admire activists who throw themselves down in front of bulldozers on tribal lands. But mostly I feel incapacitated by the thought of the coral reefs. Being poets, we embrace dismay, depression, awkwardness, confusion in the subject-object continuum. The endocrinology of horses and bats and wasps might actually instruct us. Timothy Morton writes of ambient poetics that break down the inner-outer divide. My grief about the loss of habitat is so great I have to tithe my grief, feeling it 10% of the time or it will overwhelm. I came up with this, so I grew up Baptist, and I'm not Baptist anymore, but the idea of tithing was really strong in my childhood, and so when I was working with Code Pink, I was just upset and depressed and angry and unhappy 120% of the time, and I thought, I'm gonna only tithe this on Thursdays and Fridays, and I'm not gonna allow myself to be hysterical the rest of the time. So Thursdays and Fridays are when I'm... Then I think complicated Brenda. In winter, when the mists are coming over the park, this is my frog from the park, I see the outsized nest of the industrious wood rat, sticks piled high, and hear the red-tailed hawk with its distinctive cry. And I think beauty is specific, emotion is specific, like the figures called tronies in Flemish paintings, with expressions so extreme and exaggerated that we can generalize about the human condition and enter into the magical life of the other. Before you swat a fly, be the fly. Grieving for, by the way, you don't have to swat most flies. Why are we so busy getting rid of so many insects, like this little thing that's having its life, you know? You don't have to get rid of all of them. Grieving for the loss of habitat is not done in an echo chamber. Between keening, wailing, moaning, and performing inscrutable procedures of crypto-animism, we can read. Where does poetry and love of beauty fit in? And back to what Katie was saying, we all turn to poetry in the first place because we need emblems of the irrational depths of our feelings. We are highly sensitive, almost dysfunctional, loaded with too much feeling, and the world is falling apart, and there are 18 types of grief. Poets keep dying. C.D. Wright is gone. We don't know where she is. Alice Notley is gone. Lynn Haginian is gone. Fanny Howe is gone. The threatened animals are hiding in the ecotone between states of otherness. We start writing poetry because the pleasure of making interesting or beautiful objects with words might give us some relief from the torments of loss, of our disappointment in ourselves and our life, relief from capitalist horror of having to make money, relief from the unexpected illness. Then true imagination combats sentimentality that is based on a not deep understanding, like images of polar bears on ice floes. So poetry will not tear down any system, but the importance of poetry is immeasurable. So let's see what's next. Oh, yeah. So this is that's an image of the Keystone arrest. So this was the first time Sierra Club condoned civil disobedience. And Bob and I were invited to the White House, so that's the front of the White House to chain, people were chaining themselves to the fence and we were arrested. And by the way, I just want to point out something. This will reach, but maybe it will. Just to say how complicated things are, right? This guy here, Robert Kennedy Jr., chaining himself to the White House.
Can he do it again?
There's Bob and there's me. And Bob, you can see the ashes. We got ashes where the priest was there, and we got ashes on our forehead. It was Ash Wednesday, so that when St. Mary's saw this picture, they wouldn't be mad that I was arrested. I got my ashes. Resisting Without Rhetoric. I have Paul Nelson to thank for this subtitle. I will be honest, I dislike most political poetry or poetry with an overt agenda. And like Brenda Cárdenas, it just, you want the range. You want the range and you want the complicating features. When poets try to write with evolved attitudes, they often congratulate themselves, reducing complex ethical matters to an echo chamber for the eye. It is hard to bring politics and poetry together. I'm drawn to modernists, and this speaks to what Roxi was saying earlier. I'm drawn to modernist and experimental lyric poetry that includes process, spiritual contradiction, and that foregrounds the materials of its making. But much of self-declared avant-garde poetry of the 20th century left out impoverished people or people of color, disabled people, gay people, single mothers whose cars kept breaking down, and telling poets to be abstract rather than emotional seemed an example of class and gender privilege. So I had, I've said this lots before, but I had a very avant-garde magazine tell me in the 80s that they couldn't print my poem because it had the pronoun I in it. I felt I had to devise some new techniques for interrelatedness of the self and outside and other, including non-human creatures outside prevailing models. In the late 60s, when I was crushed when Denise Levertov started writing rather obvious anti-war poetry, but later I found her a great model for poetry of resistance and aesthetic engagement. The things that I had really disliked about her directness and her reportorial techniques were actually very instructive, and people mention Brookhiser a lot, but they don't mention Levertov as much. But indeed, poetry and politics can feed each other. Pockets of doubt and paradox and uncertainty may instruct the two enterprises as they do in the work of ancestral visionary poets, Blake, Rimbaud, Yeats, Brookhiser, Duncan. 2 decades ago, I began doing anti-war work because I was in a state of depression and confusion about the ethics of war in the Middle East. I'm still in a state of depression and confusion about ethics of war in the Middle East. You don't normally hear modernist, subtle, ecologically engaged poetry at political rallies. People at poetry readings are usually not activists and vice versa. Difference between protesting in 2005 while reading poetry and protesting now is that you are much more likely to be shot while you're doing it. But I continue to believe that the values of the resistant poet and the resistant activist are similar. Gravitation to the unknown, love of language, collective experience, and the senses. Poetry and activist practice involve transgressive anti-authoritarian stances that include spontaneity, subtlety, slantness, and doubt. I value uncertainty, humor, the use of the sentence fragment, and self-mockery when I'm trying to write poetry about current justice issues. A poem does not need to be a rant to find a political audience, and that's what my fellow persons are saying. So I bring my notebook wherever I go. Modernist writing and political action can inform each other. Both can be undertaken with a large sense that the outcome must be given up because neither is perfectible. I tell myself, Brenda, this is not like flossing. There is no perfection. You don't have to do every tooth. This poem's unreadable. This shows my poor skills. This is what I read last night. It's in a book called Seasonal Works with Letters on Fire, and I'm not going to read it again. That is an example of my dragging my husband to, this was, I think in 2010. We were, I'll talk about it here. Resisting without despair. This is my third category. I recommend devising micro actions like following a single bill through the state legislature, whether or not they affect you, or the frog I showed in the first. I was going to bring my folder up. Actually, I'm going to grab my folder. This is a great tool, a folder. If you go to your state legislature office, now mine is still, you can still go to it, and you put your talking points on this side, and you put a poem on the other side, and you show up there. I've done this many times. You show up there, you're going to talk to a young person who doesn't know whether you have power or not, and you hand it and you say, give this to your representative's name, and that is worth 1,000 emails, I was told by my legislatures. And we did it over and over with Code Pink, and I still do it with environmental stuff. I'm more cautious about driving to the suburbs, but I do drive to the suburbs in my now. I feel better because I have an electric hybrid, so I'm not using as much gas. I used to think like, you're such a hypocrite, Brenda. You're like protesting oil and you're driving out to use all this gas. But anyway, micro actions, like walking into your legislature's office with what you want them. 4 points. 4 points. Hand it to them. Follow your bill. So on Thursday or Friday when you're upset, follow that bill, and you just go and you talk to them. Call the same person. They don't necessarily know that it's the same, that you're the same person. Sometimes it's different people at the desk. And also, Paul has heard this story 50 times, but they are scared of poets. If you show up with a poem and you tell them they may end up in your poem if they don't, I'm telling you, micro actions work well with hallucinating, trance, modernist, fragmentary poetry. Get to know your bioregion, as everybody has said. Follow its beauties and its sorrows. Kenneth Rexroth, and I love Kenneth Rexroth, Katie, and I love Sam Hamill, but he did used to read in the bathtub while his wife brought him more books. There are things, and I'll go on reading Kenneth Rexroth had emphasized the Western and the local, but it was mostly a male lineage of feeling and nature inherited from the Romantic tradition. The field has broadened hugely. We have new great anthologies we have captured form and content of ecological and political writing. Black Nature, really a groundbreaking book by Camille Dungy. The Eco Poetry Anthology, Big Energy Anthology. We have Winter in America. The forms are small, but the voices are loud. The current administration can do immeasurable damage. It is intolerable. Our apathy allows it. Being too comfortable allows it. Whatever you do as a writer and human being matters, as does remaining uncomfortable. We can act despite and because of our great sensitivity that make us poets incapable of functioning in other ways. Even a small amount of resistance matters. It is not like flossing. You can do an adequate job and your teeth will not fall out. Among micro-actions, reading poetry outdoors or taking well-written letters and delivering them by hand. A dozen or so years ago, Bob and I and other poets drove to Creech Air Force Base in Nevada, where they fly the Predator drones, and held signs up for 2 days, and read poetry as the enlisted folks drove onto the Air Force Base. It was embarrassing, but knowing your country is using robots to bomb peasants millions of blocks away is much more embarrassing. We were outside in the desert as things fell apart. I'm 74 and I don't have the physical stamina like Greta Thunberg to go and resist in Gaza. I know poetry will not change the militarization, but you can bring your poems outdoors. I'm trying to take back some of the time used on social media tithe, as the Baptists say, not money but time. So that's Bob, and by the way, I made him go out there. It's very hard, that kind of thing. So we talked about science and magic yesterday. This is a little pool right near the Creech Air Force Base, and it's one of the little pools where fish, the water just comes up magically out of the desert. In a place where there's no water, the water just comes up, and we saw fish thriving there. And it was in the middle of the desert, right next to the Creech Air Force Base. So you keep your imagination going. This is my group of students. We went to the oil fields, and we read we just stood there and read poetry outdoors. This was on Halloween. Our group was called Prophets, Not Prophets, and we just read poetry. It really upsets people to see people reading poetry outdoors. And they'll follow you, and you just say, they'll say, like, we went to the BP office of the oil office there in Martinez, and we said, we're going to be going to your field next door. Would you like to come with us? We said. And of course they were horrified, and they sent a truck to follow us. And we asked the gentleman if he wanted to come and read a poem. He didn't. So I said that about taking the folder with the talking points. If you organize resistance within your artistic capacities, you will feel less despair. One visit to your congressperson is worth 1,000 emails, I said. Get to know their staff. I fear we may have to take our list from the 20th century if things get worse. Intensive lobbying, boycotts, non-compliance, non-violent civil disobedience, and well-publicized strikes. Bring your notebook and a beloved poem by someone else wherever you go. And so this is my little short list. The change we seek is far away, but it's a bit of an emergency. Ice raids, climate change, militarism, wars, economic disparity. Give up perfectionism when it comes to justice work. It isn't about your ego or heroics. It's about right action. Pick your issue and do micro actions. Keep doing a little more as you're able. And even if you're tired or ill, you can do a little. The laptop and the phone are fine tools, but don't stop there. Get outside and take your imagination with you. And I'm an introvert, and as you heard from some of you heard my poetry last night, it's very sort of spiritual, really weird poetry. And I wouldn't have even gotten started with resistance 15 years ago, but I couldn't live with myself. I was sick about the Iraq War, and I'm still sick, and I have not recovered. And so I think you can go on being spiritually weird and have your private life and even your life of privilege, but if you have privilege, but you have to be uncomfortable, and I guess that's my bottom line. Okay, anyway, have a good lunch.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. There's a couple of quick questions. I can welcome them. My wonderful panelists will welcome them. Keep in mind that it's 12:30, and we will start promptly at 2. So that's 90 minutes. So a disposition will be really deep and profound, but also cost everybody lunch. So any quick questions?
Roxi, have you heard, have you heard Janelle Monáe's interpretation of Metropolis, the contemporary neo-soul artist from Atlanta? I have a video to show you at lunch.
Yeah, let's have lunch over more Metropolis. Zach, I hope you'll come. Thank you.
Yes, please.
So within our lifetimes, the composition of panels has changed, and I'm curious if you'd all like to speak to what it is to be women in this field, teaching and writing and publishing and living, and bringing your perspective. And I just want to say, it's a nice change within our lifetimes, isn't it? Can you talk to those points?
Yes.
I don't have a lot to say to answer that, except like if you try to write a grant today that's going to be for federal funding, you can't use the word woman. You cannot. There's a whole list of words you can't use, and one of them is woman.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I do, yeah, commend your question too. And they're amazing, strong people of all genders. And I'm thrilled. You know, I was thrilled to work with women on the anti-war and justice code pink, but you know, there were men and trans people there too. So I commend the diversity that we made possible, but it's in danger.
Yay, feminist men!
Jason, may I just say to you, Sarah, when you're feeling the anger that we all feel, I think it's good to remember the words of Wendell Berry, who said in the Mad Farmers Liberation Front poem, be of good cheer, though you have considered the facts.
I would like to say something about the question about women. In fact, my experience has been is that women have been one of the strongest leaders in, right from the beginning, you know, so it's one place in this world I really haven't felt, you know, a dominated male presence in there. I mean, there's certainly a lot of men that I've worked with that are also doing work, you know, theater of the oppressed and, you know, around the world, those kind of things, invisible theater. I've done a lot of the rainbow theater out there as activism, but a lot of men are involved in that. But otherwise, I would say women have been, you know, such a strong force in resistance and speaking their voices. Isn't that wonderful now that we can,
Okay, one last quick thing. There's an incredible book called The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks. It was written by my dear friend Jean Theo Harris. It's the first political and really researched biography of Parks. Parks was not a tired old lady that just didn't want to get up. She had been an activist for many, many years before that bus boycott. But also, Martin Luther King was new to town before the bus boycott. He was a brand new preacher in town and had a little boy. And when the people wanted to plan the bus boycott, they called Martin Luther King late at night and said, can we use the church to get this going, to hand out the flyers, to make everybody, so everybody knows what's going to happen, right? Martin Luther King was the middle of the night, little kid, 2-year-old kid. He's like, I don't know. I'll call you back in the morning. It was the women who went and printed the flyers anyway. And got everything ready because they figured, we'll get him to let us use the church, right? And so the next morning he called him and he said, yeah, you can use the church, because he didn't know he was Martin Luther King, right? Like, great, it's a great book if you could ever get a chance to read it. Yeah.
Thanks for coming to our panel.